Assalamu alaikum and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Kuwait Public Policy Center's flagship lecture series program. Before we start, allow me to say that it's great seeing a lot of new people here with us tonight. To give a brief introduction on the KPPC, the Kuwait Public Policy Center is a think tank within the General Secretariat of the Supreme Council for Planning and Development, specializing in policy research and analysis, aiming to provide policymakers in Kuwait with evidence-based policies. The KPPC is a platform to analyze, advocate, and support policy decisions and to direct attention towards priority development issues within the national context and concerns that are relevant to the public as well as policymakers. The Center supports GSSCPD in achieving a policy-focused national development plan with streamlined policies on health, economic diversification, public administration, education, and labor market, also the energy and environment, as well as expand public engagement by engaging all parties, including citizens, private sector, and civil society organizations in the policy-making process. The lecture series, which we're hosting today, engages international experts with local entities and stakeholders within Kuwait to build capacities and provide a platform for policy dialogue and knowledge sharing. In short, the KPPC is a local think tank with an international outlook. And today, we have a very special guest from the World Bank and a very interesting topic for tonight: public policy for innovation and technology. Allow me to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Ismail Radwan, in the World Bank Group, lead economist for the GCC. Based in Kuwait between 2018 and 2020, Ismail, now based in Riyadh, has 30 years of experience in private sector development and public sector reform issues in Europe, Middle East and Northern Africa, and Asia. Ismail's work includes economic development, trade and growth strategies, private sector development, innovation and technology, special economic zones, as well as governance. Prior to joining the World Bank Group, Ismail was a principal economist with PwC London, where he worked around the world for a variety of blue-chip clients. Ismail studied economics at Oxford University, receiving a bachelor's and master's before obtaining his degree in government administration from the University of Pennsylvania. He has lived and worked in more than 50 countries. Ismail is originally from Cairo, Egypt, and he speaks English, Arabic, and French. And you will hear from him in today's very, very fruitful dialogue. And without further ado, we pass the mic to our speaker. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mubarak. It's a very warm introduction. And thank you very much, first of all, to Mashari bin Hassan, who's been wonderful in the run-up to this. And let me thank my colleagues also from the World Bank, Nadia Karam and Mariam Abdallah, and of course, Dr. Khalid Mahdi, who has been a great supporter and also a great marketer for tonight's program, telling all of my other colleagues about it as well. And good evening and a very warm welcome to everybody who's joining in here. Thank you very much for joining. And I know that there's a lot of excitement about tonight's event, and I hope that I will live up to the billing. So I will try and talk for about 40 minutes I've been given, and we'll leave enough time for questions and answers at the end. So tonight's agenda, I'm going to talk about three things: innovation and technology, some of the opportunities and challenges, and some of the policy directions, because this is, after all, the policy lecture series for KPPC. I hope that you can see my slides. Mubarak, Can you confirm that the slides are, you can see them?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Great, great. Thank you very much. So innovation and technology. Let's start off with a couple of quick definitions to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So knowledge is the ability to do something. And the knowledge economy is based on creating and evaluating and trading knowledge. And what is innovation? Innovation comes when you take that knowledge and you create a new product or process or service that meets the market need. So commercializing knowledge, that's what innovation is. Now, innovation is not anything alien to our culture. As you all know, the first word of the Quran, Iqra, or read, and the Quran has throughout it many injunctions for knowledge. I like this one. This is one of my favorite ones. Utlub al-ilm walaw fi sin, and I translate that as seek knowledge as far as China. Right? Why China? Why didn't they say seek knowledge as far as Cairo or as far as India? In those days, China was the end of the known world. So when it says seek knowledge as far as China, it means go to the ends of the world to seek knowledge. Knowledge has always been important for our culture. Innovation really, really matters. So here, I've been asked not to talk about Kuwait, but to talk about other countries. So I think I've only got 1 or 2 slides that talk about Kuwait. And this is one of them. Just to say that Korea has no oil, was one of the poorest countries in the world as recently as the 1970s. And just because of their innovation, their technology, and the way they have focused on education and STEM topics, they are now equal in GDP per capita to Kuwait. So what we need to think about forward in Kuwait, how do we emulate that growth without relying on oil? I think that's one of the key factors of Kuwait's Vision 2035 and how to move away and diversify from the oil-based economy. I want to put this today's conversation into the broader context. You may have heard of the 4th Industrial Revolution. That's the age that we're living in now. So this is just an explanation of why it's the 4th Industrial Revolution. The first one was in the 1700s when the railroad and the steam engine were invented, and that was the first Industrial Revolution. The second one came about 100 years later with the advent of electrical power and the Fordist production line. And then we had the 3rd Industrial Revolution, that was in the 1970s with the invention of electronics and computers. And now we're living in the 4th Industrial Revolution. And this is what I'm going to talk about tonight. Artificial intelligence, big data, robotics, and more. So today I want to really focus on 5 big emerging technologies and innovations that will drive the future of almost everything, right? Every single aspect of our lives will be changed by these 5 technologies. And they are DNA sequencing and biotechnology, energy capture, storage, and transmission, robotics, artificial intelligence, and fintech and blockchain technologies. These are the technologies that I'm going to talk about tonight. And I'm going to also try to explain to you how they're all converging together as they develop very rapidly. Now, first of all, what's driving this progress? I hope you probably all have heard of Moore's law, which describes the fact that the number of transistors on an integrated circuit doubles every 2 years. Right? So the computer power gets smaller and smaller and more powerful in every 2 years. It used to be every 2 years. Now it seems to be even less than every 2 years, maybe even every 18 months. So when we think about computers, they become more and more powerful on an exponential basis. So this is, again, a review of how powerful computers have become. But for me, I think this picture really sums it all up. So on the left-hand side, you see IBM's 1956 disk drive. There were only 3 or 4 of these in the world. They contain 5 megabits, right? That's roughly what we would put on a floppy disk in the 1990s. Nowadays, on the right-hand side, you can see one of these pen drives, put it in your pocket, 1 terabyte, right? And you can imagine the cost of what that IBM disk drive was from the 1950s, and you know that the SanDisk costs something like $30 nowadays. So they say that if cars had improved at the same rate that computers have improved, you would have a Rolls-Royce for 50 fils, and you'd fit 20 of them on the head of a pin. They would travel at 10 times the speed of sound, and they would return more than 1,000 miles to the gallon. Unfortunately, cars haven't developed as quickly as computers, but computers have really developed very, very rapidly. Now, again, I want to talk to you about, again, our culture. And this is partly because I'm very, very much influenced by a trip that I made 10 days ago to southern Spain, to Alhambra, Cordoba, Sevilla, and other places where I witnessed firsthand the power of the Arab and Muslim culture from 1,000 years ago. So why were the Arabs and the Muslims so advanced 1,000 years ago? And the answer is because they had the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. So what that did is it brought people from all around the world to one particular place and space in time. So all of the ideas from every different culture right there. And as they made the tawaf around the Kaaba, they exchange ideas. How is agriculture done in your country? How about engineering? What about irrigation techniques? What kind of crops do you plant in which kind of seasons? And so forth and so forth. And you had these great centers of learning springing up on the routes towards Mecca, in Cairo, in Damascus, in Baghdad. In those days, if you wanted to study science or technology, you first had to study Arabic, because everything in science and technology was written in Arabic. And so you had European scholars, they came to the Middle East, they studied Arabic, they studied science, then they went back to Europe, and they were the ones that restarted the Renaissance. They were the ones who pulled Europe out of the Dark Ages. So that was then. Now, where do we go for our knowledge? We go to the internet, right? And that's what connects us nowadays. And you can see that more and more information is being poured into the internet every single day. They say that data never sleeps, right? So even while we're asleep, more and more data is being added to the internet. YouTube alone, for instance, has 500 hours of data added every minute. So it's almost 1 million hours a day. And now the language of the internet is no longer Arabic, it's English, and to a lesser extent Chinese. But English and Chinese are by far the most dominant languages. So nowadays, if we want to study engineering, we want to study any kind of technology, it's a good idea to learn English. Arabic is the 4th most widely spoken language in the world, and yet only less than 5% of the content on the internet today is in Arabic. So I hope that gives you an idea of the scale of the challenge and what a connected world that we live in. Now, I come to the 5 technologies that I'm going to speak about tonight. This is the first technology, and this is the lithium-ion battery. So I believe that very soon the lithium-ion battery will replace the combustion engine as the source of all energy going forward. So we can see the lithium-ion battery costs have been coming down, and so have solar photovoltaic costs coming down dramatically. So this will lead to a non-carbon world, right? We know that these batteries will be powering electric vehicles, and we know that the growth in electric vehicles is exponential. There's an exponential increase in these, especially again in the US and China. And on the right-hand side, you can see solar energy consumption is growing exponentially, albeit from a very small base. But as we know, something that's growing exponentially will always overtake something that's only growing on a linear scale. So very soon, these renewables will disrupt the oil economy. And I'm sure everybody listening to this will be very conscious of the fact of what's happening in the global environment and the COP26 discussions that have gone on. The world is not saying we can wait. The world is saying this needs to have happened already. So there will be increasing pressure on us to move away from the oil economy. And as the former Saudi oil minister said, the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones. And the oil age will not end because we run out of oil. It will end because we have other technologies that are cheaper and more efficient than those based on fossil fuels. So we know that recently in Saudi Arabia, a record-breaking price for solar energy production, less than 10 cents a kilowatt hour, was seen in the auctions, and that's 1/10 of the price of the cheapest coal-fired energy in the world. So these technologies really are getting cheaper and cheaper by the day, and they will take off. They are taking off at an exponential rate. So the second area, which I think will also revolutionize the world that we live in, and this is the genome sequencing, DNA sequencing. And we know that these technologies, again, are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And so on the right-hand side, you see how it used to cost $100 million to sequence a single genome. Now we can do it for roughly couple of hundred bucks, and it's still going down all the time. So with this reduction in cost, and you can see it's going much, much faster than Moore's law. We've had tremendous breakthroughs throughout the last decade that have really radically reduced the cost. So many of you have probably had your DNA sequenced in things like Ancestry.com or 23andMe to find out who your relatives are, where your families come from. That's a very interesting process. But I think more importantly, what's happening is the amount of sequencing that's being done is growing exponentially. This year alone, we've sequenced more genomes than all throughout the history cumulatively of the last 20 years. So with that comes tremendous amount of data that scientists are going through, and they're trying to use this information to develop medical breakthroughs. So some of the medical breakthroughs that you may have heard, once we're able to sequence the genome, we can take a look and find out where the problems are. If you have a rare genetic disease, we can cure that. We have CRISPR, which is the gene editing technology. And if you're interested, it's been used recently to cure leukemia. And if you want to have a look in the New England Journal of Medicine from June 2021, you'll find an article on that. It's also being used to cure childhood blindness. So at the moment, they haven't started human trials, but we know it works in what they call non-human primates, monkeys basically, and apes. So we're only a step away from that. And this is the technology that will be used to cure all sorts of cancers, to cure any kind of genetic defect. It will allow us to live longer, healthier, more fulfilling lives. Now, I want to talk about, there's too much on this slide for me to really go into the details. I want to talk increasingly using this synthetic biology to allow us to produce all sorts of chemicals and materials and fuels from renewable biomass rather than depending on fossil resources. So not only are we going to be under pressure because of the oil industry, we're also going to be put under pressure in the secondary and downstream in the plastics and the other derived industries from the oil industry as well. So in the future, we're going to see more and more, if you look at the bottom, in the middle, more and more implantable sensors. I'm sure many of you are probably wearing wearable sensor technology, you know, the Apple Watches or smartwatches or Fitbits or Garmin trackers, which can track your vital signs, your oxygen, heart rate, etc., etc. In future, we're going to have these implanted inside us, and we're also going to have real-time monitoring of our health. And that's going to allow much, much more data to be uploaded. And it's going to allow doctors to identify issues before they happen and take precautionary and preventative measures before they happen. So those are the two of the big technologies and innovations that I think are going to revolutionize our world. Robotics, I think, is also an area that's going to start affecting us more and more. I think the countries that are traditionally in the lead here, China has by far the largest amount of robotics installed, North America as well. But I think Asia in general, if you look at the numbers, they're probably too small for you to read, but I will be sharing this presentation later. But Japan and Korea also match the US in terms of the installed base. And if you look at the growth rates, certainly in China and in India and in Eastern Europe, you can see that robotics are really becoming widespread. And I will talk about this impact of this later on. But one of the things that's happening is that robots are starting to replace people, especially in the manufacturing sector. And all the jobs that we used to see in manufacturing being offshored to developing countries are now being re-brought home or nearshored back to the original countries as we replace people with cheaper robots. And this is going to throw up a lot of challenges for all sorts of economies, including our own, in the future. I'm going to come back and talk about that towards the end of my presentation today. So this next one is artificial intelligence. I'm sure you know, everybody listening to the lecture today will know all about artificial intelligence, so I'm not going to talk much about it. But those of you who are of a certain age will remember, on the left-hand side, you may remember a Knight Rider with, what's his name, Hasselhoff. On the left-hand side, when I was a kid, we used to wait on Saturday afternoons for this one to come out. That was a fiction. Of course, today we've got the reality. Autonomous driving is not the future, it is actually the present. So we're going to see more and more autonomous driving vehicles. We're going to see Tesla, I think, in the lead in terms of autonomous driving vehicles and taxis. We're also going to see autonomous driving trucks, which will revolutionize the cost of road transport compared to rail, and will also have a lot of implications in terms of the logistics and the transport sector going forward. But artificial intelligence, we could talk about just this one topic all day, and in fact, you have done already. So my wife is an expert in artificial intelligence, and she, I think 2 years ago, she presented to a similar audience at GSCPD on artificial intelligence. So I'm not going to say too much about that. There are lots of different types of artificial intelligence, right? So it's not one issue, it's all sorts of different things. I think it's not new, right? Artificial intelligence has been around since the 1950s, but recently it's really started to flourish basically because of deep learning and machine learning. Machines that can recognize patterns, basically, that's all it is, but they can be incredibly powerful because of three things coming together. The first thing is the amount of data that's out there. As I showed before, you know, the amount of data that's going onto the internet every day is billions of terabytes. The second issue is the complexity and the speed of programming of computers. I showed you Moore's law and the tremendous leap forward that computer programming have made. And that's just the regular orthodox computers. Now, of course, we have quantum computing, and recently Google has a breakthrough on quantum computing, and they managed to solve in 2 hours what would have taken 10,000 years to solve with a regular computer. So some of these predictions are going to go out of the window, and we're going to get there much, much quicker than we ever thought. But I think this is also, AI is also being used in conjunction with the other areas to really to provide lots and lots of powerful uses in our everyday lives. The final area I want to talk about is fintech and financial innovation. So this is the fifth area of the 5 areas that I've been talking about. So if you've ever cashed a check from your phone, or you've made a payment through Venmo, I don't know if you're listening to this and you're under the age of 25, I'm sure you'll say yes to both of those things. But then, of course, you've used fintech, financial technology. Many of these technologies are based on existing technologies, and they just use existing technologies like the internet or payments, electronic payment system, just to make finance easier. But some of them are starting to use artificial intelligence, and they're starting to use blockchain technology, actual new technologies, to do things that were not possible before. And I think well, I have moved my accounts. The World Bank has its own bank for its staff, right? So I used to use our bank for banking, because when I lived in America, it was much easier to work with the World Bank's bank, because they didn't require all sorts of IDs and things like that. They know who we are because we work for them, so they give us a bank account. But now I've changed my bank account. I'm with Wise, which is a bank that has no branches, right? My wife also has changed hers. She's with Revolut, which is another fintech bank, has no branches. So it has radically reduced the cost of operation. So they say that every new customer for a new fintech bank costs about $30 to service, whereas to get one new customer in an existing bank will cost upwards of $400. So many of the existing banks can't possibly compete on that basis. And I mean, I can just give you one example, is when I used to transfer money to Kuwait to pay my rent, I would lose about $150 every month just in the transfer. After I changed to Wise, it cost me $10. So it's going to be very, very difficult for these banks to compete, and I think this is going to certainly revolutionize everything, but not just the banking sector, but also the payments sector, as we move more and more commerce onto the internet and we rely more and more on internet commerce. I think this is going to be a revolutionary new approach. We could talk a lot about this and digital currencies. I'm sure you're probably all investing in Bitcoin and you're wondering what's next for Ethereum and whether Libra will take off. Let me leave that to the questions and answers sessions. I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion if you're interested. So those are the 5 technologies that I wanted to talk about. The other thing just to say is that they are rapidly increasing in the pace of take-up. So this graph shows how quickly, and this was in the US, how quickly these technologies took off. So it took about 100 years for the telephone to take off from when it was invented to the point that it was in every household. It took about 60 years for cars, about 40 years for TVs. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's no more S-curve. The S-curve of technology take-up, we always talked about this S-curve where you have some people gradually taking up and then it takes off and then it gradually levels out. That's disappeared, right? There's no more S-curve. These curves are more or less straight lines. Things are going viral, right? So take up of social media, take up of tablets, ebook readers. One moment nobody has a smartwatch, next moment everybody has a smartwatch, right? That's what I seem to notice. So I think, and then you see the landlines going up to 100% and now coming down. These old technologies are being replaced, and sometimes they're being replaced very, very quickly. So I don't know if you all remember Clubhouse. I was in Kuwait when Clubhouse took off. By the time I got invited to join Clubhouse, I think everybody had moved on to the next great thing, and I was left behind, wondering why there were no more conversations on Clubhouse. So these things are really changing very, very rapidly, and I think this is what's really creating the opportunities and also the challenges, which is what I'm going to talk about now. So this is a graph of the stock market wealth in the US from the 1970s to 2020. So the gray amount is how much of the market cap was in tangible assets. Tangible assets are things like buildings, bricks and mortars, cash, inventory, land. And the light blue is the amount that is in intangible assets. These are things that don't actually exist. Patents, brand value, software. You can't really point to them. They're not bought and sold, but they're tremendously valuable, right? What you can see is that the amount of intangibles has gone up from 17% in 1975 to more than 90% in 2020. So shouldn't be a surprise. If you look at the really big companies like Facebook, Google, they don't actually buy and sell anything, right? Airbnb, I hope you know Airbnb. It's not big in Kuwait, but around the world they provide hotel rooms, and they allow people to rent their own houses and bedrooms in some cases. So Airbnb don't own a single apartment, they don't own a single hotel room. But when they floated on the stock exchange last year, they were worth $100 billion and upwards now. And that's more than the 3 biggest hotel chains in the world, Hilton, Marriott, and Sheraton put together. So that shows you how quickly we can create value and how important these platforms are going to be. So not really very surprising that WIPO calls it the new currency. Innovation is the new currency. Information is the new oil. All right, so no surprises here. We didn't have internet in 1995. We have almost universal internet in 2015. But of course, there's big gaps still in Africa. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Then what else is happening? This is, I think, the reason why we need to stop looking at traditional markets, Europe, Japan, UK, US, and why we need to have a look east policy, look east towards Asia, because I think this is where a lot of the new innovation will come. They've often said that the 21st century will be the rise of the Asian century, and you can see here Chinese consumers make 50 times more mobile transactions than US consumers. Brazilians use the internet at some stage in 56% of all purchases. And you can see the tremendous compound annual growth rates in Indonesia and in India. So that's, I think, where a lot of the new innovation is going to take place. So what else is there? What other opportunities are there? Digital technology can improve government services. And I know that GSCPD is part of government, so I really want to highlight this. The more that we move to electronic services, e-government services, the better service that we're going to provide for our citizens. The more complaints they're going to be able to make, the more quickly those complaints are going to be resolved, the more information we're going to get to them. And we know that with e-government systems comes increasing transparency. And I know the transparency of the budget, of procurement, of other issues is of great interest in Kuwait. Some of the things that the World Bank is interested in may be not so much. Just to mention these, we know that there's a digital divide, and this is one of the things that the bank is trying to work on to make sure that nobody gets left behind. Almost half the population of the world are not currently in the digital economy or don't have access to internet. This is something that maybe Kuwait may be interested in having a look at, see what we can do to help some of the countries in the region to bridge that digital divide. How can we ensure that the rest of the world gets access to internet and high-speed internet? And Kuwaiti companies can benefit in the process as well. If we look for new financing techniques and ways to cross-subsidize some of these packages. Now I come to some of the challenges that we're going to see from these technologies. And I think I alluded to this in terms of manufacturing when I talked about robotics. So it used to be the case that if you wanted to develop your country, you would only have to develop your manufacturing base, your industries, and that was the way to do it. And I think most of Asia has really taken off because they've taken manufacturing from Japan, from other places, from the US, and they've offshored them to places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and South Asia, India, and Bangladesh, and places. So now that's increasingly not an option. So this growth in this area has really shrunk a lot. Robots are coming and replacing a lot of jobs in the process, and more technology needs services. And that includes financial services, engineering services, design services. And so it's not so easy just to rely on manufacturing. And I think that has implications for our future growth model. Kuwait cannot be thinking about special economic zones, about manufacturing, about industries for the future, because this is not an area of the future, it's actually an area of the past. We need to be thinking more about technology, about skills-based, about open data. So we know that the digital technologies in the future will be based on these topics, right? We'll need to have high skills, we'll need to have open data. And I think we need to move Kuwait towards that area so that we'll be able to benefit the most from these opportunities. One of the other things that's talked about a lot, especially in recent years, is the fact that there is rising inequality. You hear this all the time. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. But when you look at the numbers, it's not actually the case. It is the case in Anglophone countries. If you look at the left-hand side, every country that basically speaks English, this is what's happening. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And some of the equality that we had in the 1970s and early 1980s is being lost. And this is creating rising social conflict and tremendous issues in many societies. This is something that we want to avoid in Kuwait if we can, and I think every society wants to avoid if we can. But we can see that in continental Europe and Japan, that's not the case. Despite Mr. Piketty and some of his thesis, I think that the jury's still out. There's still quite a lot of equality and development and technology in those countries. So it's not something that's inevitable. So those are a little bit about the opportunities and the challenges. I come to the last part of my lecture today, and I think we're more or less right on time to talk about a little bit of policy directions. What does all this mean in terms of public policy? So this is far too much for me to present, but again, I will leave you with the slides and I will leave you with some other areas to look at if you're interested. I want to just focus on maybe two messages from this slide. One is in the middle there, the future of work. The World Bank has done a huge study, World Development Report topic on this, which basically looks at the implications of many of the things that I've talked about and which jobs will be automated, which jobs will be displaced, and how computers will come alongside humans, and what the implications are for our education systems, for our manufacturing, for our supply chains, for immigration, for urbanization. The last point I want to make is on the far right-hand side, because this is something that we are thinking about in Kuwait, the new social contract, right? So if work becomes less important for earning money, then how do we remunerate our citizens? So there's all sorts of experiments in terms of the universal basic income. I know that Kuwait is thinking about this and has plans maybe for the future. But it's not just in terms of giving money to people. I think the new technologies allow us to give better services to the citizens. And the more and more that we adopt digitalization, the better satisfied the population is going to become, the better opportunities that they're going to have, and the more diversified the economy will be. So, as I said, the World Bank has done a lot of deep research in these, and they're published in our flagship reports. This is the World Development Report. It's published every year on a different topic, and these are some of the topics that we've had in recent years. I start with the one in the top right-hand corner because this has just come out now, 2021, and this is on big data, data for better lives, and it talks about the data revolution, and it talks about some of the implications and some of the opportunities just in terms of data. Others, I've talked about the one in the middle there, the changing nature of work. There's an older one in the bottom right-hand corner, which was knowledge for development, which talked really about knowledge and how important it is, how to harness it for the development process. A few years ago, I can't remember, I think it was 2018, we did the report on the digital dividends, which looked basically at digital government services, and went into great detail there. But you will find all of these reports on our website if you're interested. Just to Google World Bank World Development Report and you'll find it. So, as I said, this is one of the things that we're looking at. I saw my colleague Hassan on the call today, and I think this is an area where he really focuses on active labour market policies. This is one of the challenges for almost every country in the world, how to create jobs, how to create meaningful, satisfying opportunities for the citizens. And this is becoming more and more important, and we're spending more and more money on it. Here is a quick overview of some of the experiments, UBI experiments, universal basic income experiments around the world. And I think the bank has been involved in some of these. And I think there's a lot of evidence coming out now, and a lot more countries are starting to think about this as the future. So happy to take questions on that topic as well. So in terms of what this all means for Kuwait, how do we take advantage of this? I think in terms of innovation and harnessing innovation, we need to really focus on the innovation ecosystem. So we need, yes, an educated and skilled labor force. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. We need to have a good business climate, because you can have the best people in the world, but if you wrap them up in bureaucracy and red tape, they're not going to be able to create what you want them to create. But, and of course, you need the information infrastructure. So Kuwait has that to a large extent. You have 5G networks and you have good communication infrastructure. So this is the third area is the one I think is potentially missing in Kuwait. It could be strengthened. And this is how you create effective innovation systems, how you link together universities, consultants, the private sector, research tanks, and government organizations, how you put them all together to commercialize and spin out ventures from the university. I'm going to talk about that now, but this is basically the theory of change. Let me just go quickly on this. This is one of the inputs, research and development. So the more research and development you have, the more ideas you can create. I promise not to talk about Kuwait in this. I do have Kuwait there, but let me just say that I think the more we can focus on research and development, the more we can create these ideas, the more that Kuwait can benefit from it. The second area is boosting human capital, especially improving the education system in Kuwait and introducing some ideas right from early stage, introducing STEM subjects very early on, introducing coding in our primary schools. This is what some of the most successful countries in the world do. And I think it's something that we are already partnering with Kuwait on to improve this area. So I want to finish with some practical ideas rather than a framework for thinking about it. Hopefully one or two of you will pick up on these ideas and take them forward. So the first thing I think we want to do is attract talent. So this is what the best countries in the world do. right? This is what US does amazingly well, what UAE does in the region very, very well. They source the best talented people, and they have a flexible labor market and a skilled immigration policy, so that you're not just immigrating poor, uneducated, low-cost workers, but you're actually looking for the best and brightest around the world, and you're encouraging them to come, create value, develop ideas, and create jobs in your economy. Let me skip to the open culture. I think, again, we know that more than 50% of Silicon Valley startups have one or more immigrants as a key founder. So if you look at many of the founders, I mean, Elon Musk, he's from South Africa, he's not an American. If you look at, many of the guys like in the tech companies, from Hotmail, Skype, the guy was from Estonia. Hotmail was created by an Indian. So all of these, but who benefits? The US benefits, because they've created the culture that's open to accepting them, open to allowing them to start up, having the financing, venture capital to start up, and allowing them to fail and restart. Many successful entrepreneurs have one or two failed startups behind them, from which they've learned a lot of lessons. So I've talked a little bit about capital. I think that's one of the things we need to focus on in Kuwait, creating these alumni networks and angel investor networks. So Stanford University does this, I think, is probably one of the best in the world in creating these networks. So their alumni have created 2.5 million jobs, 40,000 companies have come out of Stanford University. One of the things they do is they take students from outside of business school with ideas that could be commercialized, and they give them a 3-month course that teaches them entrepreneurship, introduces them to experts and investors, so that they have an instant network, they have mentors to help them, they have the access to finance, they can develop their ideas. So this is something that US universities do fabulously well. I think if you want to find out more about this, take a look at what happens in the Research Triangle Park in the Raleigh-Durham area. You can also look at Singapore One North facility. I think they do this better than anyone else in the world. I think the evidence is very clear that university ventures are 100 times more likely to end up as publicly traded companies. So we need to really focus on universities, and also if you look at what UAE has done in terms of inviting in the best universities from around the world and partnering with them and allowing them to start up. We've done a little bit of that in Kuwait. I know that Sciences Po is teamed up with KFAS, I think, and others. I think there's a lot of potential in that, and we need to focus on getting universities that are in the top 500 globally. At the moment, Kuwait University is the best, but still just around 1,000 right now. So we also need to start inculcating this into the education system at a much earlier age. So I have 2 boys there in university now, both of them engineers. They did not start coding at 7 years old like they do in Estonia, but they certainly started coding in high school, age of 13 or 14. And now just seeing the kind of things that they're doing is really very impressive. So we need to start early in primary school. One of the things my wife did when we were in Kuwait was to take on bring the AI Family Challenge to Kuwait. And she worked with, I think, about 30 families to develop this kind of ability using AI. I'm very happy to say that one of the Kuwaiti families that she worked with won the global competition in the AI Family Challenge. So that shows you that Kuwait has tremendous potential. You have really bright people there. If exposed, they can become the best in the world. And I'm happy to talk more about that experience later on. Finally, let me say, I think we really need to promote diversity and this is one of the things that the World Bank is really interested in. But there's a lot of evidence. IPOs are 30% higher at companies with more equalized gender distribution. If you look at the way female participation on boards is reflected in the value of the companies, we really need to do our best to involve women and minorities in a much greater extent. I'm not talking about Kuwait here. I'm just talking generally. This is the evidence, the global evidence that's coming out from successful examples. So I think I've more or less stuck to the 45 minutes that I promised, and I hope you found it interesting. And now is your chance to ask any questions or just give your opinion or perspective. I'm happy to listen to you, and thank you very much once again for giving me this tremendous opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir, for a fascinating and thought-provoking lecture. You've proven to us that fostering innovation and technology has many different implications to how we understand the world as we know it in the present, and you provided us with invaluable information on what we can expect taking the leap forward into the hands of innovation and technology. You also dwelled onto the many scales of impact, from the international to the domestic, from older examples to the newer ones. And I think this helps provide us with very invaluable and relevant material on what to expect pivoting in the future. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for providing us a wonderful and very fruitful insight into a very topical topic. We will now pass the floor onto the for the Q&A session. As of yet, we've got 3 questions. I'm going to provide them in order. We've got the first question from Faisal Al-Fuhaid in regards to blockchain technology. Seeing as it is seen as a decentralized technology, how can governments properly utilize said tech while maintaining its decentralized nature? I'm going to give you time to allow for an answer, and then I'll move on to the next question.
Do you want to just, we go through all the questions and then I'll come back?
All right, if that's what you prefer. All right. The second question is from Tamer, who asks, how does Kuwait compound benefits from progress already achieved locally and internationally to catapult its economy forwards in the long term? And the final question is from Nada Al-Asousi, and I think this question is on all of our minds right now. The question is, will there be a chip in our body in the near future?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let me take a go at answering those questions. I think that I see plenty of other questions as well. So thank you very much. So the first one, blockchain, yes, it is a decentralized technology, and it was implemented as a decentralized technology, basically to move away from the centralized monopoly of central banks in terms of currency. So this is why it has been very popular, and it has been very robust. So if you look at, for instance, the Chinese tried to push out data mining for Bitcoins. So what happened? Nothing. It just moved from China to Japan to Vietnam and other sites in Asia. And if it is decentralized, it can't be squashed in the center, right? And so this is, I think, one of the things that was behind the push from Libra, which was the digital currency that Facebook was proposing. So once you have a digital currency that Facebook owns, it's no longer decentralized. It's actually incredibly centralized, and that would give a lot of power to Facebook in terms of tackling some of the existing huge market opportunities. They were talking about using Facebook to transfer money from migrant workers we have a lot of migrant workers in Kuwait. They transfer a lot of money. This is a huge market because the fees are so high. I think it's a $60 billion market annually. So this was one of the opportunities that Facebook was looking at, but also all sorts of commerce and all sorts of shops that they have on Facebook now. And using Libra would really give Facebook a tremendous power advantage over those commercial opportunities. Yes, that is why it is decentralized. I think what we're seeing now is the usual development. First, you fight them, and then you accept them, and then you team up with them. So, first of all, central banks tried to regulate out the blockchain technologies, tried not to give them banking licenses, and I think now we're thinking, a lot of countries are thinking of introducing their own digital currency. So Venezuela has accepted, I think it was the first country to accept Bitcoin. Sweden has developed their own digital currencies. So I think we're going to see much, much more of that in central banks. The reduction in costs through digital finance are tremendous. So conventional banking cannot possibly compete. So we will move to it. The question is how fast and whether the regulations will keep up and what governments can do to control it. So I think this is an area that is developing. We're trying to develop regulations as we speak. I think it's very, very difficult because of the pace of change. So I don't really have a good answer to the question, but I think what central bankers are looking at is how best they can use this technology and how to apply it to many of the issues that they're facing. So will we be wearing a chip? So people are very worried, and I think this is behind vaccine hesitancy. I think people are saying that the vaccine was either a conspiracy by Bill Gates or a conspiracy by a global cabal to inject us all with a chip that will monitor us. Quite honestly, I say to them, if you have this technology, which I think we all have, then you shouldn't worry about it because this thing is already monitoring, right? The phone has information on where you are, what you're doing, who you're talking to, the phone listens to you. All of that is already being recorded. So if you're comfortable carrying your phone, you need to not worry about any chips. But on the other hand, maybe the questioner was asking if it's going to be an improvement in our lives. And I think if you take a look at Yuval Harari's book *Sapiens*, he says that this will be the future, and that we will be uploading automatically more and more data. We'll all be, if we want to, we'll all be having these wearable and implantable chips, and they will be helping to regulate our health and making sure that we are, well and able to perform at our best. So who knows? I think the answer is probably yes, but I don't think it's something to be worried about. I think it's something to look forward to. Mubarak, please.
Yeah, I don't mean to inconvenience you, but would you be willing to take 3 more questions? We've got 3 more questions from the crowd.
Yes, I'm happy to take as many questions as you like.
Lovely, thank you. So we've got the first question is from Hanan Al-Awadi, who asks, it is so obvious that the future is data-based, yet during pandemics and natural disasters, which we have limited control over, we regret that we have not invested in local manufacturing, in brackets, similar to what happened during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, how can we balance between being a knowledge economy and endorsing local manufacturing? That is the first question. And then we've got 2 questions from Dr. Hisham Al-Sarhan. First question is, what is your input about the best way for introducing digital literacy skills courses to be part of the education system? Second question is, what about legislation and social challenges that might face the implementation of new technologies? Example, AI and self-driving cars. How to face them?
Okay, thank you very much. A very interesting group of questions again. So I think, I think it was Hanan's point about local manufacturing. What I would say is I was in Kuwait at the time of the pandemic, and I spent 6 glorious months under house arrest, as everyone did. And actually, I enjoyed my time very much. I didn't find that we lacked anything, right? So what exactly should we be manufacturing? I don't think we lacked anything. Certainly, I made fun of all of my friends in Europe who couldn't find toilet paper and had huge shortages in the stores because everything we needed in Kuwait was there, plenty of it. So, also Kuwait had a lot of masks, a lot of personal protective equipment. We had the vaccines. So why do we need to make it? I'm not sure what's behind this question. So if we have access to it, that's all we need. Kuwait is a small country, a very small country. If you look at just the local population, we don't have the mass scale needed for big manufacturing. What we need is high tech, high value added, innovative jobs. And I think we don't need very many of them, right? Because we're such a small country. If you look at small countries with high tech industries, you look at Nokia in Finland, one or two big companies enough to really take the country forward. But that's the area that we need to focus on. I think there's no reason to be making things ourselves if other people can make it for us cheaper and quicker, and we can be sure of that supply. The second question is digital literacy. What's the best way for introducing digital literacy skills? I think possibly in some, I don't want to talk about Kuwait because I really have not studied in depth the education system, but let me say in some countries, part of the pushback is from the teachers who are not particularly digitally savvy themselves. So I think if this is the challenge, we need to start with producing a cohort of digitally savvy teachers who can then introduce these skills in the school system. I think the best way is to introduce it as early as possible, and there are good models to be followed in Korea, in Finland. I think Finland's possibly the best. Estonia again has done tremendous things in this area. So rather than listen to me, I think I can refer you to our education specialists, or you can take a look at some of the publications that I put up there. But I think to start early and also to think about the curriculum seriously, the curriculum that we're going to require for future skills, I think is really important. So let me turn to the last question, I think, about social challenges. Yes, there are going to be lots and lots of social challenges. I raised some of them in my presentation. I think self-driving cars is definitely one topic. So the question is about AI and self-driving cars. We are trying to think about the new regulations for self-driving cars. What if a self-driving car kills a person, a pedestrian on a crossing? Who is to blame? Is the car a legal entity? Can we blame the car? Do we punish the car? Do we punish the manufacturer of the car? Or do we hold accountable the person who developed the software for the car, right? So is it an issue of the car being insured and the insurance company, footing the bill? Or how do we do it, right? So these are gray areas. These are things that people have never thought about before. And AI ethics in itself is a whole new industry that's thinking deeply about these questions and trying to come up with solutions. So what I would say is the most successful countries, again, are the ones who have national AI strategies. And if you look at many countries have done this. If you look at the EU, they have an EU-wide strategies for AI. They're also working on the standards. And there is also a group in the UN who's looking globally at AI ethics and standards for the future. So this is this is an area that's growing in importance, and I hope that answers the question as much as I can.
I dearly apologize, Ismail, but my hands are tied on this one. Dr. Khalid wants to ask a question. How will the new social contract differ from the current one, from a global perspective?
Dr. Khalid, always a pleasure to hear from him. I think he always picks the tough question. So the social contract, I think, that we have now in Kuwait is all about providing benefits to the citizens and providing subsidized energy, healthcare, education, social benefits. And I think that's something it's great for the country, great for the citizens, and it's been tremendous opportunity since Kuwait's independence. So how does the social contract differ in the future? I think new technologies allow us to improve the services that are going to be provided to the citizens, improve the openness and transparency. So one of the things that we're moving in that direction in Kuwait, right? So we have the State Audit Bureau has published a citizens report. I hope that we will move gradually towards open budgeting, to have a citizens budget, and to move towards open government. So a lot of the data in Kuwait remains behind closed doors and locked up very tightly. It's not always clear to me why. You know, people say, you know, there are possible dangers, but quite honestly, if somebody wants to get this information, they will get this information. So much better to put it out there, much better to publicly have these databases open. We know that there's a very, very good link between open government, between transparency and effectiveness of government services, right? So I think this is the new social contract going forward. Will have to be the previous social contract plus, right? Citizens are going to expect more of their governments, and they're going to expect to have a say in what happens in government. I think Kuwait is the most democratic of the GCC countries. You have a very active, perhaps some would say too active, National Assembly. And I think the way to channel that going forward, you have plenty of different options. The digital options allow you to touch base with all of the citizens, for instance, in ways that we couldn't have dreamt of maybe 20 years ago. You can survey them very easily through phone surveys. We've done all of these kind of things to take a pulse of the nation as we go through what's happening during the pandemic. We have ways of trying to gauge their interest in various topics and programs that we didn't have in the past. And I think that will be the case going forward. Citizen engagement will be the new byword for government, as it was before government services. I think that will be the future for the social contract.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ismail, for what is clearly a wonderful talk on wonderful issue with a lot of key points that stimulate our thoughts in a very constructive way. Thank you very much. And we'd like to also extend our thanks to the audience for attending our lecture today. And we'd like to inform that for further information, you may visit our website kppc.scpd.gov.kw. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you, and may you all have a great night.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to be with you tonight. And thank you very much to His Excellency Dr. Khalid. Always good to see you. Thank you, Mubarak, and thank you, Mashari. And thank you very much to all the participants. Please do be in touch. I hope that this is not the end of our interaction, but just the beginning. So I'm very passionate about these topics. I don't live in Kuwait anymore, but it still has a very special place in my heart. And I would love to be able to support you in any way I can going forward. Thank you very much. It's been a great honor and a great pleasure to be with you tonight.
Honors ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.